Hello, everybody. I was reading Genesis chapter 37, and that's when Joseph is thrown into a pit, sent down to Egypt. And there's a midrash on that I think that when he was in the caravan, the spices smelled good, or maybe Hashem made the spices smell good. So even in that, like he must have been going through a lot, but he was able to perhaps find and experience God's presence there. And there's another midrash I think I heard from Menashe Silverglide. Like when Joseph was in prison, uh, he was like shining. His face was shining, like just in prison. He was like so happy. And he's like, and I think someone asked him, or how do you maintaining such a positive attitude? I mean, can you imagine? It sounds like it's like your family, your brothers sold you into slavery. You start having at least some, come back and coming back from that, and then like you're framed and accused of the worst thing and one of the worst things, and like thrown into prison in a foreign land. I mean, like it sounds like a pretty bad situation, and but I think Joseph says in the midrash that he knows everything Hashem's doing is for the best, and he knows it's only for his good, something like that. I think there's more to it, but I just want to highlight that scene. And I was reading Martin Buber's Tales of the Hasidim, and one of the famous stories about Reb Zusia. And Reb Zusia had a teacher, the Maggid of Mezrich, and some people came to the Maggid of Mezrich and was like, how does one accept, how does one deal with suffering in the world? Like, how can one be happy in amidst all that? And the Maggid of Mezrich directed them to Zusia. And Reb Zusia had a very hard life. I mean, poverty, pain. There's all these. I mean, he frequently got beat up. I mean, it was not a easy life. Uh, in terms of being free of suffering. So, but they approached him and said, "Oh," Reb Zusha said, you know, I mean, Maggid Mezrich said you're the person to talk to about, how to deal with suffering." And Reb Zusha, I'm paraphrasing, but he said basically like, I haven't suffered in life at all. I don't know. I think you got the wrong guy. Or something. I haven't. So, so I want to, and then, the Martin Buber writes that in this tale that Rav Zusha was able to accept suffering with love. And so I certainly have not mastered this, but it's something I'm practicing, and I love the idea of calling it a practice, like it's the practice of accepting suffering with trust and love. That God forbid I or any of us are tested with suffering, and this isn't about desiring suffering or even certainly not trying to explain other people's suffering or why not people should or should not feel certain ways. Not at all. And this isn't in praise of suffering, meaning like, well, I mean, there is. I'll revise that. This is not about desiring suffering, and like, certainly if there's suffering that we have that we can alleviate, I think we should do that. So that's. But I'm talking about suffering that we can't do anything about, which I feel is like there's a good amount of that. Like if it's cold, you can put on a glove, but sometimes it's not good enough in the moment. Or someone might say or do something that's hurtful. Like there's just a lot of things we can't do anything about. and that cause suffering. And I think one of the things for me that got in the way is I used to think suffering was a sign of failure of some kind. Like that for me to admit to myself that I was in suffering, it was somehow failing. Like, I don't know, I have some ideas, but I certainly think like, oh, I needed to be happy all the time, or I needed to like, or that I could somehow get to this state where there would be no suffering, and that then I'd be doing life right. And so it's taking me a while to accept that no, that suffering is actually something everyone goes through. It's part of the human package, and I understood that intellectually, but beginning to understand that on a heart level is helpful. I mean, obviously I've understood that to some. It's all on a spectrum. I mean, it's all on a spectrum. So what I have been practicing with Hashem's help is when suffering comes to me, I trust it as a gift from Hashem. Like, I'm aiming to trust it as a gift that Hashem is giving this to me out of love, the same way He's giving me everything in my life out of love, and that I want to accept the suffering in love and not push it away, not to like to, like sink into it, not to like devolve into self-pity, like woe is me, though sometimes that's okay too. It's more like, oh, suffering's here, let me hug you, suffering, like I love you. And if this is what Hashem wants for me, and it wants you to be here, then I want you to be here. And when Hashem wants me to be joyful, then I want that too. It's like whatever He sends me is like what I'm supposed to have. And to know that there's something, to trust that there's not one state more desirable than another. Certainly I can want maybe certain things more than other, but then to know that this is His show. And anyway, may we all practice this art of being compassionate towards the suffering in our lives, and then, God willing, may we even be more compassionate to the suffering of others. And I don't think we can be as compassionate to others if we're not first as compassionate to ourselves.